Luke, we're approaching the American election, and do you think there is any indication at all as to who might win?
I think there is quite a big indication. The question we're going to pose today in this video is Donald Trump finished? Do Americans finally want to get off Mr. Trump's wild ride? What we're going to use to make the argument that the answer essentially is yes. We're going to look at polls and so on. Before we look at this, obviously, there has to be a consideration. Trump could actually win through the courts. The Supreme Court could decide if one state goes to Donald Trump or goes to Joe Biden, just like it did in the 2000 election in Florida. However, that is looking increasingly unlikely just because, if it comes down to a couple of states, then sure, I guess you could challenge the results. But if it's like 10 states that you need, well, that becomes a lot harder. I think before the Trump campaign were primed to try and challenge the results of Pennsylvania. But if Biden doesn't even need Pennsylvania...
No, yeah, I mean, the best he can hope for is be like, well, I didn't lose by as much. One of the things that you're not necessarily going to take into account when looking at polls and stuff is any kind of shenanigans that are going on. But the point is that as things stand, if you're looking at the polls, and even if you're ignoring the shenanigans, you look at the polls and you see a picture where shenanigans aren't even going to make too much of a difference. And by the way, I would imagine, for example, that polls do take account for things almost naturally, things like voter suppression when it comes to, obviously, there are various attempts to suppress the votes of minorities. But I would assume at this point that's such an ingrained part of American democracy and all the other terrible things about American democracy that the polls are kind of already aware of those.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine.
But despite voter suppression, Luke, the big reason why I think that Biden is going into this with quite an advantage and Trump is going into this with quite a disadvantage is that it seems like there's going to be a very high turnout. Now, I think this could have been assumed all the way back from the midterms because, generally speaking, a general election is going to have a higher turnout than the preceding midterm. If there's a very high midterm election, it's likely people are excited and willing to vote, and they're going to go out and vote even more in the general election, because who cares about midterms, am I right? So it was already kind of there, but I think there's even more evidence now that this is going to be very high turnout.
Yeah, and the high turnout obviously will naturally help Biden since probably 2012. Generic Democrat versus generic Republican. Who wins? Generic Democrat. And so if the turnout comes out high, then I think Biden will win.
I actually did read an academic article on this, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but basically the point it made in simple terms was that there are a minority of people in the USA who are Republicans, but they are much more likely to vote. So essentially, as the number of voters increases, the greater proportion of those people are going to be Democrats. Because obviously, young people are more likely to be Democrats, minorities are more likely to be Democrats, people who tend not to vote as much are more likely to be Democrats. So therefore, the more people who are voting, the more of those people will be Democrats.
Yes, yeah, that is the case for sure. It's why, even though Democrats actually, if you look at the 2018 midterms, they did very well. The Republicans were not shy about coming out to vote in those midterms. But yeah, the high turnout of both sides, and the Democrats have more voters. It's as simple as that. But if you look at, say, the 2014 midterms, historically low voter turnout.
Yes.
And the Republicans...
2016 general election, very low turnout.
The Republicans took both the House and the Senate in 2014, and of course, the presidency in 2016.
Yeah, and I mean, you can just see this in the way people behave. Like, go out to vote is almost at this point perceived in America as a democratic message. Not literally in terms of it being about democracy, but also in terms of the party. Like, if somebody's saying go out and vote, that's a democratic party affiliation position, which is pretty embarrassing for the Republicans. That's point out, like, that their main position at this point is we want people to not vote. That
has been their reality since 2012. Like I said, that's something they have recognised since that day. They have been like, well, unless we change, the only way we can win if turnout is high is to suppress the turnout.
But beyond just the precedent of high turnout equals democratic victory, are there any other strong indications that the Democrats are doing well this election cycle, say in the polls?
Yes, so we can look at the midterms and look at the high turnout and say, yes, that's going to carry over. Even the primaries, actually, the Democratic primaries got so many voters. So many, suburban voters coming out to vote for Biden in those primaries. And
woo!
Yeah, and that's going to be the key. The question is, does that translate to the polling? And it seems to be the case that, yes, it does translate to the polling. This is from ABC News. Powered by trust on the pandemic, Biden leads by 12 points nationwide. 12 points.
Oof.
Nearly 6 in 10 disapprove of how Trump has handled the coronavirus outbreak.
Yeah.
Joe Biden specifically holds a 17-point lead over Trump in trust to handle the coronavirus pandemic. 2/3 of registered voters say Trump failed to take appropriate precautions against the virus. 62% distrust what he says about it, and 8 months since its arrival in the United States, just 21% say it's under control. Just 21%. So I imagine that's all Republicans, and that means like half of them are still like, yeah, it's not under control.
Yeah.
In this poll, the presidential race stands at 53% to Biden and 41% to Trump. Massive. Interestingly, it's 48 to 48% among men, and among
bloody
women,
men.
This is great. Among women, it's 59 to 36.
Oh, you know what, Luke? Excuse me, I'm talking. Mr. Vice President, I'm talking.
There has been a lot of talk about toxic masculinity in the last few years, understandably, and sometimes it has replaced actual, political, I guess, reasoning for why stuff happens. But that's just crazy, man. That's just crazy. 23-point difference between how men perceive this election, how women perceive this election. It is really suburban women voters that are driving the support for Biden. And that shows in these polls. But of course, what I mentioned just then was one poll. Just one poll, and it's big lead for Biden, 12 points. But if you look at the overall aggregate of polls, you can see me and Michael are both looking at 538's graphic here. Who's ahead in the national polls? And it is from October the 11th, so it's a few days out of date. But you can see that Biden has a 52.2% share of the vote compared to Trump's 41.9%. So that was just one big ABC poll, but even in the overall aggregate of polls, Biden is still winning by 10.3%. So he's, 12%, 10%, he's got this seemingly in the bag. And of course, there was a lot of talk last time out about Hillary Clinton looking at the polls. Oh, she's got this in the bag.
Yeah. So, everyone thought, you've heard this all before, Luke. What's the deal?
Well, here's the deal, Michael. Here's the dealio. And this goes back to the turnout thing we talked about before, I think. In 2016, 538's final polling average was Clinton at 45.7% compared to Trump's 41.8%. Now, as you can tell, that's a lot of undecided voters. That's what, 45.7 plus 41.8?
That's basically 10%, give or take.
We're talking about 10%. Undecided or third-party voters. But now, Trump, interestingly, has increased his share of the vote by, again, 0.1%.
Nice, nailed it.
0.1%, and of course Biden's at 52.2%. So, remarkably, Trump is doing ever so slightly better, but basically the same as 2016, while Biden is almost 7% better than Clinton.
Yeah.
So that's massive. Even more damning for Trump is, the undecided third-party vote is, literally less than half it was a few years ago. So what this means basically is there is going to be so few late deciders. Like, people have already made up their mind. People have already voted.
Yeah.
Like, people are really engaged with this election. And as we talked about before, that's going to hurt the Republican candidate.
And also, I think this dispels the idea of, even if we allow for the shy Trump supporter position, which obviously in the UK, the term shy Tory has been around for ages, people who say, they're undecided or whatever, and then they vote for the Tories. But even allowing for that, there is not that massive pool of people who are going to be undecided, who might be saying they're undecided, but then actually when it comes to it, they're going to support Trump. You're not going to have shy Trumpers in the numbers you think. And the other thing is that, of course, the polling has been so much more stable than it has in 2016. When you look at the polling and also the predictions during the 2016 election, Clinton was consistently ahead, but it was up and down all over the place. So it wouldn't have been shocking to say that when it actually came to the election, it would go up for Trump and down for Clinton because it had been going up and down all the time. That's not happened this election cycle.
Yeah. We've got a graphic up right now. Again, it's from 538, or comparing the 538 percentage chance of winning the election in 2016 compared to 2020. The top one is 2016, the bottom one is 2020. And as you can see, look at that. The Clinton one, it's like a wave, and as is the Trump one, constantly up and down, up and down, up and down.
Yeah.
And the Biden-Trump one from 2020, it's remarkably stable.
It's like parallel lines.
Yeah, almost just completely straight. It's actually Biden's actually extending a bit as well in recent days. There has just been this thing about Trump since he won in 2016, like, how did he do it? He was so incredible. Of course, he lost the popular vote by 3 million. He just won, like, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin by slim margins that gave him an inflated lead in the Electoral College, which, of course, he didn't deserve anyway because he didn't win the popular vote. But, that's America's electoral system. But, of course, if you're losing by 10 points, you're not winning the Electoral College. You've got no chance. There was so much talk about how did he do it? He knows something that all the pundits don't. Well, this is what I said from 2016, and I'm saying it today. He's not good at politics. Like, he's genuinely awful. He doesn't know what he's doing. He was always unpopular. When he was in the news the most during the 2016 election, his poll numbers plummeted. And his best, I guess, days or weeks were when he wasn't making much news.
Oh yeah, actually, I found something out interesting about Trump's disapproval rating. 3 of the presidents ahead of him in terms of approval rating. I think it was the specific thing was around the midterms. The 3 presidents ahead of him in terms of approval ratings directly were all one-term presidents. So basically, Trump's approval ratings have been very low throughout his entire presidency, which is not boding well.
No, that's the thing. I said it in 2016. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were so lucky to be running against each other. They were so lucky that they were running against each other, because in any other election year, both of them would have been guaranteed to lose. And, seems like this is the case. Biden,
it's another election year now, Luke.
Yep, it is.
And Trump's running.
Biden is a very generic Democrat. He's not that popular, as we have talked about in previous videos. You see his performance at the debate. Again, he wasn't spectacular, but his poll numbers have increased since then just because Trump was so annoying. Such an idiot, I guess. A clown is what he was described as by many people after that debate. And it's just so easy to win against him. And it should have been the case in 2016, but again, Hillary Clinton was historically unpopular. Voters, when looking at who's more honest, Trump or Clinton, Trump won that battle by 17%. And at this election, it switched. Now Biden is winning by 17% when it comes to who is the most honest between Biden and Trump. So yeah, he was so lucky he was running against Clinton, and the same goes for Clinton. Obviously, she was lucky she was running against Trump.
That's the thing. Like, if this was. We could be looking in 2020, if Clinton had won in 2016, maybe we dodged a bullet, because who knows what more palatable Republican would be running in 2020 against Clinton and potentially winning.
Yeah, that's what I think. There could have just been someone who was more popular, didn't do these crazy things. That's the thing. The American public, they prefer a generic Republican to Trump. They would prefer somebody like, I guess, Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush or even Mike Pence, which, I don't know now because he's been with Trump for 4 years, but they would prefer him to Trump.
The thing is, of course, whenever anybody talks about the election and makes a prediction about the election,
which we are doing now.
Yeah, which we're doing now. Pretty much everyone will come and say, well, people made these predictions in 2016 and they were wrong. And obviously we've already gone through all the reasons why it's so different to 2016. Now put their fingers in there and say, oh, Trump was a 30% chance of losing in 2016 according to 538, and then he won, which, first of all, that doesn't prove anything. I mean, I know this is such an obvious thing, but it just needs to be pointed out again and again and again. You can say the polls were wrong, but you can't really say that the predictions were wrong when the predictions were expressed in terms of chances, because a 30% chance is really not a bad chance. And to be honest, you could make an argument now that even 14% chance isn't terrible. I mean, if you or I had a 14% chance of becoming president of the United States in America, I think we'd say that was pretty good.
Considering we're not American, I'd say that would be a pretty high percentage. Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing. People just don't understand the percentages. And if there were some people like the New York Times that gave Clinton a 99% chance, which again, looking at the undecided voters was just ridiculous. But overall, the polls weren't actually that wrong. They were, I guess, wrong in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, but the national polls, Clinton won by about 2%, I think, overall. She was meant to win by 3% nationally, which, of course, is well within the margin of error. So that's the thing. I think people, maybe they've had their brains broken when it comes to the 2016 election. And
actually, speaking of broken brains, have you heard about this Helmut-Norpoth model?
I think I've seen that. Yeah.
So basically, it's the one that predicts Trump is going to win the Electoral College by 400 seats. And it's called, it's basically the idea is it's called the primary model, and it looks at enthusiasm in the primaries. And the logic is that basically it pretty much amounts to the fact that usually an unpopular one-term president is going to get primaried, and Trump didn't really get primaried in any meaningful sense, so therefore he did better. That's pretty much what it all boils down to. But the funny thing is, people look at it and go, oh man, he predicted loads of elections right. But the thing is, when you actually look at the prediction, the first thing that needs to be pointed out is that there's loads of different models, and ultimately all different models are constantly being tested by looking at what the model predicts and the results. And that's why, for example, 538 is reasonably popular right now, because it actually has done quite a good job in terms of models. This Helmut-Norpoth guy predicted that Trump would win by a lot in terms of the popular vote in 2016 as well. So he's predicted the right result, but it is a case of he just happens to have picked the right result. He's got a model that just happens to work, it seems, because when you actually look at what he predicts in terms of these specific numbers, he's always wrong. He just happens to have got the technical correct winner. And I think obviously if you look at the 2016 election, Trump won, but anybody who predicted Trump would win in 2016, if anything, that kind of counts against their credibility. Because when you actually look at the results were not of somebody who should have won. If your prediction, unless your prediction was exactly, Trump will lose the popular vote, but he'll win Wisconsin, because a tiny bit of Chicago doesn't extend into Wisconsin, and he'll win Florida because Florida's panhandle is a bit long. Because if you change those two facts, I don't know if you've seen this, if you make a bit of Chicago in Wisconsin and you shorten Florida's panhandle, just do those two things, Trump loses the election. So they're like, yeah, we'll predict that he'll just narrowly win these states. If somebody predicted that, I'd be impressed. But if someone's argument is, yeah, Trump will win in 2016, and then you see the results and Trump just narrowly scrapes by the thinnest margins in the most surprising, weird, peculiar circumstances ever, then you kind of have to go, okay, well, if you predicted Trump was going to win, that kind of makes you look like a stupid person, because if anything, Trump really, he basically should have lost when you look at how the actual results played out.
Yeah, no, and I saw that model, and it has New York going for Trump, the state of New York going for Donald Trump,
yes.
which, I mean, if you want to talk about how ridiculous that prediction is, then, we could do it for ages. But yeah, and that's the thing about Trump, though. He is unique. You say it measures primary, enthusiasm. And that's the thing. Trump has a lot of enthusiasm among his base, but it's very limited.
Yes, exactly.
He has a high floor, but a low ceiling. It's his vote number is limited, but then again, he's always going to get 41.9 or 0.8% of the vote. That's just kind of inevitable. So yeah, overall, I think our conclusion is Trump done? Well, he still has, like we said before, about a 14% chance of winning, and crazy things have happened. But you would say, unless something shocking happens in the last few weeks, of course we're just, I think, 3 weeks away from the election. Unless something crazy happens, then yeah, it's over. Trump is finished. He's done. And I have to say, I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss the big boy, because there is, of course, he's a horrible person, but I kind of like that about him, because what I do love that Trump, and this is what I truly do believe, he has exposed modern conservatism in its most pure form. He is the natural endpoint of the direction it has been going. And I don't think, there's talk now because of Amy Coney Barrett being elected to the Supreme Court about, conservative originalism and all these judicial philosophies that I studied when I was in school in sixth form and all of that stuff. And, it just doesn't exist. Like, principled conservatism in America, or indeed in our country, doesn't exist anymore. But if we focus on America, you can see the decline started in the 60s with Goldwater and Nixon, and then it fully died in the 80s with Reagan. And the trajectory that conservatism has been on since then, it could only end up with Trump. All the racism, the sexism, the lying and the deceitfulness, the entitlements and the selfishness and the sheer sociopathy of the whole ideology, I think it's perfectly manifested in that man, Donald Trump. Yeah, so I will be sad that when he goes, because it kind of did prove my thoughts on conservatism quite well.
I think that the longer conservatism continues, the more illegitimate it has to become. Because the problem with conservatism is that it's always pushing back against the current push. So in the 60s, conservatism was pushing back against racial integration. In the teens of the 1900s, it was pushing back against women getting the vote. Things like that, it's always been pushing back. The problem is that obviously then they have to, eventually they accept the thing that's happened, they accept the change. So it's kind of like, the longer conservatism exists, the more you're like, well, the same people who believe the exact same thing as you rejected the stuff that you now accept. So it's kind of hard to take it seriously. And I feel like the problem is when you've got an ideology like that, which is just becoming more and more illegitimate with every single passing decade, there just has to be a point where you go like, no, to be honest, we don't really have any values. We don't have any principled objection to these things. That's why we've grown to accept these things as it's become more socially viable to do so. We're really just, arseholes. Either they're doing it for their own kind of self-interest in terms of preserving their power, or they're doing it because they just don't like people who are different to them. And neither of those things are good. And I think I agree with you that it's good that Trump has exposed them for what they are.
Yeah, no, I agree. So yeah, that's it, I guess. So now after we've recorded this video, Trump's going to win. He's going to win. I know, exactly. Biden's going to have a heart attack, and it'll be Harris against Trump, and Trump's going to win 42 states and take it all. That's now got to happen, right?
Yeah. And to be fair, though, it should be pointed out, even if that did happen, it would not prove us wrong, because all we're saying is when you look at things as they currently are, it looks like Trump's going to lose. So, if something crazy happens, that's how it is. Maybe Trump will get lucky, but that doesn't mean we were wrong.
Yeah, exactly. We're never wrong.
That's the thing. We should always express every single opinion we have in terms of probability, and that way we can never be wrong. Just be like, I think there's a 55% chance the Earth is flat. And then someone will be like, actually, it turns out the Earth is round. And we'll be like, well, You're just lucky. That's good.
Yeah.
We can end there.
Do it! Just do it! Yes, you can!